roundtable. So Professor Nandini Ramanujam is, of course, not only a professor of law practice at McGill University and head of the Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism, but also a deeply honored, appreciated, and indeed adored member of our board of governors here at CISDL. And together with Professor Dami, she has kindly agreed to moderate the next roundtable her way. Go ahead, please, Professor Nandini.
You can hear me, right? Thank
Yes,
you, everyone. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me, giving me this honor to chair this roundtable. I will keep my remarks to minimum because the expertise is just, there's a wealth of expertise around, and they are pertinent questions ahead of us. So I welcome you to the second roundtable, Innovations in Training and Advancing Sustainable Development Law and Governance. And I've been listening to all of you very carefully. Congratulations to the authors for the wonderful book, which I plan to order for my teaching. So, as the UN says, we are living through an era of polycrisis. And I think all of you who have spoken so far have referred to the crises. So climate-related emergencies, a sort of immense pressure to the rule-based international order, rise in inequalities, and AI and the information disorder, which adds to this very stressful situation for the global community. And amidst all this is erosion in trust in democratic institutions, particularly in the North, which is highly disconcerting. So this is the background, and this roundtable poses 3 questions. And what I'm going to do is to invite a group of experts to answer 2 questions. These are overlapping questions. So I would like to invite Advocate Lara Duvarzitis, who is the Senior Legal Executive, Net Zero Lawyers Alliance, Dr. Jennifer Mass, who is an Associate Fellow of CISDL and works as a Senior Expert at Deloitte. And also, I invite Advocate Douglas Lace, KC, Professor Tenia, Kyriazi, and Advocate Emily Morrison. Their impressive bios are shared with you in the program. And for all of you, there are 2 overlapping questions, and I'll invite you to engage with these 2 overlapping questions, taking 2 to 3 minutes, as our previous colleagues, the previous experts have done. So the questions ahead are: what innovative approaches are most effective for training practitioners and policymakers in sustainable development law, especially given recent ICJ and Inter-American Court of Human Rights advisory opinions? So this is question number 1. And the question number 2 I have is, just a second, I'm here with you. The question number 2 is, how can legal education and professional training bridge the theory-practice gap while preparing lawyers to represent the interest of future generations in addressing sustainability challenges and advancing sustainable development goals? So these are 2 overlapping questions about legal education and pedagogy, how innovation can advance the agenda of sustainable development, intergenerational justice, and justice now. So I invite, I think I'll just go in the order of the names I have mentioned. So I start with Lara Duvarzitis, followed by Jennifer Mass, and then I'll remind the other speakers when to intervene. So over to Lara for 2 to 3 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. I won't take up any more time thanking all of you individually, but thank you for having us here. The first question, the ICJ and the Inter-American Advisory Opinions provide clear obligations for legal professionals to integrate the principle of sustainable development into commercial legal services, and that's the angle that I come at. And I'm happy to say that this principle is embedded in our organization's framework for net zero alignment, which was a document that steps out how commercial law firms can reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions, but also assist clients in unlocking opportunities for the transition. And this framework is innovative in the sense that nothing else existed like it beforehand. It's written by lawyers for lawyers to call on them to develop net zero strategies, specifically that align with the SDGs and the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. But another key way that we help break down these legal barriers in innovative ways is to have law firms provide pro bono hours. And I'm really proud to say we had some of our law firms support states pro bono before the ICJ in their climate advisory proceedings. Those lawyers are now giving a debrief session to all of our law firm members, and I have specifically requested that they address the treatment of sustainable development and how it informs the interpretation of obligations under the climate change treaties, to make sure that every commercial lawyer listening to that presentation pays attention to that in particular. And on that, one innovative way to get better at this is to do more of it. And I know perhaps it's not innovation in its purest sense, but if you're a nonprofit or a charity and you have a pro bono request that would benefit from commercial legal support, we do have a link, and we act as a bit of a matchmaker. And by doing this work, juniors in law firms, partners in law firms, work on more matters that relate to sustainable development, and that is innovative because those matters don't often come across desks. Finally, to support the legal profession, we convene accelerator groups focusing on breaking down legal barriers, and we have one specifically on business and human rights and just transition. And we recognize that the Sustainable Development Goals is one key instrument to do that. And so we work to skill up those lawyers across commercial firms, senior lawyers in particular, recognizing we don't have time for juniors to take 30 years to get into senior positions. So I'll leave that there for now and appreciate there's more to come for the second question. I'll drop the links in the chat below for those who want the resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara, for a very cogent and insightful intervention. I turn to Dr. Jennifer Mass to respond to the two questions. You can combine them together, choose one or the other.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. And also thank you very much for including me today. So I try to combine both, but have like a little focus on the first question. So from my perspective as a lecturer and the sustainability assurance senior, I see a strong potential in approaches that bring legal reasoning into dialogue with the real world implementation challenges. And the three recent advisory opinions and questions, they are not abstract. They speak directly to how states and institutions must act in light of the climate risks and the intergenerational obligations. So they also help to crystallize the legal obligations. And what we can actually learn from these opinions is that sustainability law is no longer aspirational. It is increasingly normative, it is justiciable, and it's enforceable, at least partially. So these innovative approaches we think of should enable learners to understand the doctrinal knowledge, of course, but also move beyond towards a more system-based and more forward-looking legal reasoning. So what makes these approaches effective then? The different perspectives, of course, in sustainability-related judicial reasonings need to be embedded into training. For example, when we think of the ICJ's advisory opinion, it emphasizes that states are under a due diligence obligation to prevent transboundary environmental harm and must act with the highest possible ambition. And the Inter-American Court stressed the interdependence of human rights and environmental protection and expanding on the legal understanding of the term territory. And at the same time, due diligence bears also the proper necessary regulatory and legislative measures to also bind then non-state actors. So altogether, these insights can be brought into training settings, either through like case-based and scenario-based learning or cross-jurisdictional exercises. But what is needed is that every learner engages with the actual reasoning and implication for the very domestic implementation through this kind of simulating the multi-level legal processes. And especially in sustainability law, interdisciplinary understanding of the underlying science, the socioeconomic impact, and the policy objectives is essential. So we need to come from principles to practice here. And just a brief practice example in my workplace, translating European Union regulations, such as the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, into assurance-ready reporting of private entities requires exactly this hybrid expertise, which is legal, operational, scientific, and ethical. So we increasingly engage in internal and university training formats that combine regulatory analysis with the ESG data interpretation and stakeholder risk mapping. And all of these are closely aligned with the spirit of the recent advisory opinions, as well as the broader international law obligations which arise. And this is exactly what is demanded, like proactivity, cooperation, and equity. And when we have these trained cross-functional teams, they interpret regulatory standards and the international legal obligations all together. And while this approach is just a very brief and not perfect approach, it reflects like a shift in a sustainable way of working with people together. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maas. And on behalf of CISDL, I'd like to extend our deep gratitude for your brilliant and substantive work on the legal commentary on the SDGs. So thank you very much for your intervention now and for your amazing work. And now I turn to Advocate Douglas Lees, KC, for your remarks or your thoughts on the two questions which I pose to all of you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to focus on the second question, and in that context, I'm going to leverage my experience as a former general counsel of the Green Climate Fund. I'd like, and please stop me if I go overboard. Don't be embarrassed. Please just call me out on the time. What I'd like to start is asking a question. What if law students could learn from documents governing $5 billion in real climate projects instead of just the case studies? And today I want to share how we could use institutions like the Green Climate Fund to revolutionize legal education through what I call the living labs approach. That is using real, evolving climate finance documents as dynamic teaching tools that prepare lawyers for the challenges of tomorrow. Now, the living labs revolution, as I call it, is using traditional legal studies, as we know, rely on case materials. The GCF model, we think, would transform this by using actual accreditation documents, fiduciary standards, and project agreements as living teaching materials. Key innovation of this is that students would be able to analyze real GCF documents that govern active projects, like coastal resilience, plans extended 50 years into the future. They are not just reading about law, they are engaging in legal frameworks which will impact future generations. For example, when Cyclone Winston devastated Fiji, we had students working on us on how we could amend Article 12 and 17 of the project agreement to mandate post-disaster retooling for future generations. The second area I want to focus on is bridging theory and practice for future generations. The GCF's explicit mandate to consider future generations provides a template for temporal advocacy, teaching lawyers to draft enforceable intergenerational provisions And I haven't finished digesting the ICJ opinion as yet, but that jumped out at me as a particular area, which we need to have this kind of trusteeship of present persons looking for future generations. Now, 3 practical applications arrive from that. Law students will be able to partner with GCF accredited entities to draft opinions for life projects. Future impact, students would learn to design accountability mechanisms that protect interests decades into the future. And adaptive contracting, using GCF's climate responsive force majeure clauses as models for future proofing and legal agreement. And the third area, which I want to focus on, is multi-stakeholder collaboration in action. Climate finance requires consensus across, and I'm using the GCF as a model, 24 board members from developed and developing countries. This is very complex, as my tenure there I went through some awful experiences because of this consensus and this ideological division between 12 developing and 12 developed. But this is fertile ground for students because students could stimulate GCF more negotiations, learning to balance private sector interests and the public good. There would be direct access innovation, teaching governance structures that empower local institutions to steward resources for future generations. And cross-disciplinary projects, law students collaborate with finance, science, and policy students on joint climate projects. So with these immediate, these foci, we move beyond the case studies, we democratize legal technology, and we mandate cross-border training. Thank you, Madam Chair. I end by saying the climate crisis demands lawyers who can think in decades, not just billing cycles. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for lucid and concrete examples, helpful to all of us, those of us who teach, those of us who are training or just practicing. So thank you very much. And now I turn to Professor Tenia Kyriazi for your interventions on those 2 questions.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for the book launch. This is a very, very useful resource. We can't wait to bring it to the classroom and to our students. So I'll address the second question mostly, but I'll touch upon the first because in the recent ICJ advisory opinion, there are 4 references to education and to the obligation of states to also provide education. And I know they're hidden because obviously they're not the most prominent one, but they're not the most prominent ones, but they're there. So 4 references to the obligation of states to provide education, which tie really well with Article 29 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, that besides what is established by Article 28, which is the right to access to education, Article 29 establishes the right to access to quality education. And the Committee on the Rights of the Child has elaborated and interpreted this obligation to also include education about the environment and the Sustainable Development Goals. So that brings us into the how are we going to do that? How are we going to provide quality education and to engage the students? And I've heard some very, very, very good advice that really reflects my approach on education for the Sustainable Development Goals. And that is summarized in 3 main areas: diversity, interdisciplinarity, and collaboration when we want to be effective in engaging students with the Sustainable Development Goals. Obviously, we've discussed, we have elaborated on how the SDGs are cutting across different disciplines and different areas of law. So it's not just the areas of law that are cutting across, there are also different disciplines, science, finance, and so on. This was not the case when I went to law school. Everything was pretty siloed, but I see, and I'm very optimistic by looking at and exploring at what is happening in legal education around the world. And I see lots of collaborations. I see lots of interdisciplinary approach to research and to teaching. And it's not just about removing the silos between the different disciplines and the different areas of law, but it's also about removing the silos between researchers and teachers. right? So teaching has to be research informed, and also our research has to be available to be taught and made interesting and engaging for students in order to engage students. And we see that universities around the world are engaging more and more students with practice-based learning. And Douglas, you mentioned a few excellent ideas. We also have the MUNs, the Model United Nations. We have moods around the world that students are engaging with environmental law issues. There is another question that I saw a question on the chat that was about funding, and about someone was asking whether there is funding. So that's another government obligation that we need to be more vocal and advocate for states and intergovernmental institutions to provide funding for research and for teaching in an interdisciplinary approach to the SDGs. And finally, I will close with that the institutions, the higher education institutions themselves, they have a function that they need to serve, that this is the function of being the role model, because students, the universities are living institutions, and students are living and they're learning, and they're looking up to us and to the institutions and for examples on how to become global citizens and engage with the civic society, right? So how the institution is treating its employees, how the institution is respecting the environment, is also something that students learn from. So it's not just what we do inside the silos of the classroom or in a mooting exercise, but it's also how we behave as an institution, and as members of the institution, and what role model we provide to our students.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Kyriazi, for emphasizing on values, principles, stepping away from silos and binaries, and the role of experiential learning, engaging with the real world as students and teachers, and the collapse, trying to this false binary of theory and practice ought to go. So thanks very much for that. And for these two questions, our last speaker or expert who will intervene is Advocate Emily Morrison, project lawyer, International Bar Association. So I turn to Advocate Morrison now.
Very much, Professor Nandini, and it's indeed an absolute honor to be here amongst such esteemed panelists. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you. As a project lawyer at the International Bar Association, I'll spend just a couple of moments focusing on the role that bar associations and law societies, as powerful collections of lawyers with the potential to educate and train lawyers on how sustainability and climate change challenges intersect with daily practice, can play in this space. And I want to emphasize the role that bar associations can play in bringing together lawyers with members of the academic community, with scientists, with regulators, and community representatives and other members to understand what implementation of the SDGs really means in practice. I'll provide just a couple of examples of the work of both my organisation, but also other bar associations in this space, and I'll end with just a couple of comments around the ICJ's advisory opinion. Firstly, to talk about training programs and specialist conferences, the IBA's ESG Accelerator Training Program, which was convened by the African Regional Forum last year, delved into the many ways that sustainability issues intersect with daily practice, whether that's thinking about how we can embed sustainability questions in mergers and acquisition transactions, the rise of sustainable finance, or understanding some of those complexities around climate change, nature, just transition, and the need to alleviate poverty that Professor Damilola spoke brilliantly about earlier today. We can also see an emergence of bar associations and law societies who are issuing specific guidance for legal practitioners to help them understand how climate change and broader sustainability challenges impact on their professional duties of competence as lawyers, and specifically how particular areas of practice, such as property law, might be impacted by the escalating adverse impacts of climate change. We're seeing bar associations publish specific resolutions urging lawyers to learn about sustainable development and to counsel their clients on related risks and opportunities. And to speak just briefly about the roles that bar associations might play, not only in educating the broader legal profession, but also at the law school level. I was informed just last week that the Pakistan Bar Council Director of Legal Education has made environment and climate justice a mandatory subject of training and a core course in the Bachelor of Laws program for all law schools across Pakistan. There are so many actions that bar associations can and are taking in this space, and it's inspiring to see. To end, I just wanted to echo the comments that were made by Professor Gehring and Professor Bowman earlier in today's first roundtable, that this advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice has critical and wide-ranging messages, not only for the duties of states and their responsibilities, but also for the direction of the future regulation of private actors. And as a consequence, it is imperative that it's not just the international or the public sector lawyers, but also the private sector lawyers who are paying attention to this opinion and are signalling to their clients the future direction of travel as a consequence. And I really do want to highlight that point made by Professor Gehring around the need for every lawyer, whether they're from the trade background or from wherever they are across the world, to consider what this means for their area of practice. And the challenge now for those who work at bar associations like myself is to digest these new advisory opinions and to ensure that their teachings are shared far and wide among members of every corner of the legal profession. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Advocate Morrison. And I am just going to, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to pose the third question for a set of experts. And the question we have is, why is collaborative, multi-stakeholder, legal and interdisciplinary education and training becoming essential for intergenerational justice, and what examples show promise? The previous interveners have emphasized the importance of interdisciplinary approach to tackling the challenges ahead of us related to sustainable development. But perhaps you could be very precise about the role of collaboration, collaborative approaches in forging innovation to tackle sustainable development challenges and advancing the agenda. So for this question, I will turn first to Advocate Ayman Sherkawi for 2 to 2.5 minutes, and then I will go to the next person. So over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. We stand today at what the UN Secretary General has rightly called earlier this week a moment of opportunity, not just for climate action, but for deep structural transformation rooted in justice. The opportunity is legal, political, and profoundly intergenerational. Just 2 days ago, the ICJ delivered an historic advisory opinion on climate change. I won't go into too much detail on this, as Marie-Claire and others already covered important aspects in their remarks previously. What I would like to say, however, in response to your question, is that we must also invest in the capacity to design and implement laws, especially through collaborative legal education and youth-led governance innovation. From my perspective, as director of the Hassan II International Center for Environmental Training, as deputy chair of the IUCN Commission on Environmental Law, as lead counsel for climate change at CISDL, and as a mentor for UNDP's Youth for Climate or for the African Youth Climate Hub, I see how critical it is to empower youth, not only as advocates, as important as that role is, but also as legal and institutional actors. Through experiential learning, as you just mentioned, referred to moments ago, legal training and intergenerational mentorship, we can unlock the potential of a new generation of jurists, negotiators, and guardians of climate justice that is aligned with, inter alia, the important outcomes of the Transforming Education Summit and the Summit of the Future. This aligns as well with the UNSG's message for World Youth Day, again, a few days ago, where he reminded us that, quote, peace, social justice, and economic dynamism depend on tapping into the power of youth, not into some distant future, but today, end of quote. Youth are not a policy sector, they are right holders, decision makers, and essential contributors to law and governance. Our role then is to co-create learning spaces that connect legal doctrine with the lived realities of climate risks, from coastal erosion in Senegal, heat waves here in Morocco, glacier melt disrupting livelihoods in the Andes, to flood displacement in Bangladesh, saltwater intrusion in Pacific atolls, wildfire-driven migration in Southern Europe, urban heat waves in France and Italy, and sea level rise threatening low-lying areas along the Baltic coast. These platforms must be inclusive, interdisciplinary, and transboundary, just like the challenges we seek to solve. The ICJ has clarified important aspects of the law. The Secretary General has framed the opportunity, and the world's youth are ready to act. Let us then meet this moment by investing in the legal and educational architecture that will carry us towards a more just, resilient, and sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those insights. And now I turn to Dr. Walter Szabo for your intervention. Again, 2 to 2.5 minutes, please.
Yes, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much to the organizers for putting together this fantastic event. I'm going to keep my remarks quite brief, and I just want to reflect very briefly on the importance, in response to the question, of course, on the importance of networks and also on the importance of collaboration, be them internationally, but also regionally, on the importance of that in terms of sharing experience, but also expertise when it comes to sustainable development, but also teaching sustainability and environmental law more generally. And on that, I think it's very, very important, particularly for regions like the MENA region, the Middle East and North African regions, which I've been involved with for quite a few years. And just to highlight a good example or a really, really valuable example of this sort of collaboration and network and the role that it plays in this space. And that is the Association of Environmental Law Lecturers in the Middle East and North Africa, and the fantastic work that has been doing for the last 7 years or so to try to foster collaboration, to foster share expertise, share teaching materials, share teaching methodologies, but also resources, and promote the spread of environmental law teaching in the region. And it's played a fantastic role in that regard. And I think it does this through a number of ways. Its annual conferences are very, very important in that regard, and it offers opportunities. And in my experience, being part of this for a number of years, I've seen just how much environmental law has spread, not just from a few universities that were offering courses in this region, but also to quite a few different institutions across the region that now offer environmental law as a core course. And I think that is really, really important. But it's not just important in terms of the sharing of expertise, but also the promotion of interdisciplinarity. And our SEMO events are quite notable because they bring together not just lawyers, but they bring together practitioners, they bring scientists on board, and to share expertise. And they are also quite innovative because they bring together students as well. And for me, that I think that is really a good example of just how networks, but also collaboration at that level can really help with promoting sustainable development in the way that I think we hope to see. So I'm going to stop there just because I don't want to dwell too much on that. But I think the important thing is about networking and collaboration.
Thank you. Thank you very much for particularly underscoring the critical role of professional associations in advancing the innovation in training and pedagogy. So now I turn to there are 2 remaining speakers on my list, Advocate Raul Zhe Huang, followed by Dr. Ilaria, who was supposed to speak for the first question. Are you there with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, you're there, Professor Ilaria Espa. That's fantastic. So we start with, sorry, I have just, bear with me, my notes closed, so I'm just, yes. So we start I turn to Advocate Raul Zhe Huang, followed by Professor Ilaria Espa for their last comments on this question.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. And also many thanks for the organizers to include me in this meaningful discussion, and also for other participants who share their insights on this question. Yeah, so I think the topic assigned to me applies a relatively simple logic, which concerns the importance of legal and interdisciplinary education and training for intergenerational justice. And as a matter, a critical component of sustainable development, I think intergenerational justice should be a necessary component of sustainable development education. And the connection, I think, between the realization of this goal and the education as the instrument or tool towards this goal is that it trains people into responsible voters in a democratic system to participate in the decision-making process. And it is only through this way can we achieve a sustainable policy and law in their making. And with this process, I would like to introduce some examples from China that sustainable development education in China does not start as an advanced study in universities. It starts much earlier, which is part of our compulsory education and also college entrance exam. I think it is important to start this education before college, because in that earlier stage, it is easier to expose the public to these compulsory and general educations, so that the general civil society and the public could be better trained, be equipped with this knowledge, and participate in the decision-making process of the state. And we know today that many of the participants here, we are experts in this field, many of them much more senior than me, which I hope to learn from. But I think another point is that we should also look at people who do not have that much of the knowledge and time to study so deeply into sustainable development knowledge. And we as advocates, as practitioners and educators, researchers, have the responsibility to simplify relevant knowledge in a more reader-friendly way to convey them to the general public. Yeah, this would be my understanding to this question.
Thank you. So accessibility, you are emphasizing on accessible material, access to knowledge. So thank you very much for those excellent insights. And for the last sort of set of interventions to Professor Ilaria Espa on this question. After that, I'll hand over the floor to Professor Damilola to conclude the roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind invitation to take part in this important event. And first of all, congratulations to Mary Claire and Damilola on the publication of a wonderful book, very much needed. I'm sure it will make a great contribution to advancing our understanding of sustainable development law. I'm also delighted that this event is taking place just a few days after the release of the ICJ advisory opinion. I do share the excitement with all the colleagues that have commented on it. So I'm not going to spend more time. I know we're going to have many more events and much ink is going to be spent, and very rightly so. I just have 2 minutes, so I'm just going to use them to stress a message that I very much believe in, and that's already been discussed by some of my previous speakers, which is very much the fundamental need to break disciplinary silos in education, in training, but also, as I'm a professor, in research, because this is what at the end drives younger generations, academic trajectory, but also it helps advancing and innovating and developing constantly updated educational contents that can reflect the depths of today's sustainable development challenges. And I just wanted to give one example. I've been teaching trade law now for a number of years, and I didn't start that long ago, but at the beginning I had a course on WTO law, which then developed into international trade law. Guess why? And then became international trade law and sustainable development. And again, because the trade regime is in deep crisis at the time of poly crisis, and it cannot survive if it does not deliver effective solutions to practically help solving the climate crisis, among others, including for support of energy transition solutions. And in this course, I can explore new topics at the interplay of these two domains. And what I do, I always try to include new lectures that develop out of ideas that are brought within the context of interdisciplinary research projects, often applied research projects, when we work together with engineers, with environmental scientists that are really developing new approaches, new models for scaling carbon removal technologies, sustainable fuels technologies that would require new value chains and therefore new trade instruments to support scalability. And then we'd explore and collaborate with a number of stakeholders, industry representatives, to understand what are the regulatory gaps and barriers that could be of course, brought down. And also we sit together with policymakers to find solutions that could contribute achieving the net zero goals. So in a nutshell, more interdisciplinary teaching and training, but fundamentally, as was also mentioned before, it has to draw from interdisciplinary research. And of course, this requires more funding, but I think also law schools need to develop more of a culture of rewarding interdisciplinarity in academic trajectories of younger scholars and professors. So those are my reflections. Thank you so much for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much. And I think everyone will share this thought with me, that each one of you brought in insights based on your personal engagement with teaching, research, training, and practice, which is so valuable to all of us. It was not meant to be, and it is not a conversation in abstract or at a high theory level. So that is really appreciated. And I hand over the floor to Professor Damilola for moderating the questions and concluding this session. And thank you very much for once again giving me this opportunity to engage with all of you.
Thank you very much, Professor Nandini. I think you've done a fantastic job with this session. And there is, if there is one key message that all our speakers have highlighted, it is the power of collaboration in advancing the SDGs and in advancing sustainable development generally. So I want to really thank our speakers for those powerful insights that they've shared. There could be questions, so we will take a few questions. I believe we still have some time to take a few questions.
Muskan is online, Damilola, so she can give you the synthesis questions.
Yes, please go ahead. Thank you.
Absolutely. We had such lovely questions from all our participants, but I've tried to consolidate them into 2 questions, and I will share both of them with you, Professor. The first question that was asked by Advocate Momita Das Gupta from Bangladesh, Kishan Kumar Singh, Gabriel from Nigeria, Mahe Kondel, and Mohammed Shiri from Sierra Leone. They raised a question regarding the important concerns that were there about implementing international legal principles at the domestic level, particularly ICJ-related advisory opinions, and linking them to national laws and environmental government strategies such as waste management. They also wanted to check how can legal training help practitioners reconcile global frameworks like UNFCCC and Paris Agreement with national responsibilities and realities, and what practical tools or institutional innovations can support more effective integration and application of these principles, especially in resource-constrained settings. The second question that was raised by Roshni Bhattarai, Ruchira Bali, Najat Sakai, Anuradha, and an anonymous attendee, they wanted to ask about the evolving role of interdisciplinary education and legal knowledge systems. They wanted to know at what stage should interdisciplinary and multi-stakeholder learning be introduced in maybe a student's academic path, undergraduate, postgraduate, or maybe at a professional level, and how can these approaches help ensure meaningful stakeholder participation, track legislative interventions related to climate sustainable development, and maybe promote access to reliable knowledge resources or transformative legal practices.
Thank you very much, Advocate Muskan, for the questions. I think if we were to take these two questions, we need another session to be able to unpack them. But what I'm going to do is perhaps the questions on training. So I think I can categorize the questions into two, one on capacity building and training, and then perhaps the other one on the role of interdisciplinary collaborations and partnerships. So maybe for the first question on training, I'll probably turn to Professor Tenia, Dr. Walters, as well as Professor Ilaria to just give us maybe 1 minute summary of how they would tackle that. Then after that, I will come to Advocate Ayman, Douglas, and Advocate Raul, as well as Dr. Jennifer to sort of tackle the other one on interdisciplinarity and collaboration. So the floor is yours, Professor Tenia.
Thank you. So am I answering the question that was about when do we introduce interdisciplinary research and education? Is that right?
The first one, yeah, I mean, if that's the one you feel more comfortable to tackle, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, because I think for me, and I think we mentioned that as early as possible is the answer, because the more we go into, the more we focus on one's discipline and through the PhD and through our master postgraduate studies, we tend to focus more on a topic, then the less able we are to collaborate and have an open mind and think through interdisciplinary lenses. So I think, and I see, and I'm being optimistic, but I see a lot of examples in schools, and I think one of the previous speakers mentioned that we see in schools that they do a lot of projects, a lot of education that are incorporating interdisciplinary lenses into contemporary problems such as AI, SDGs, and so on. And I think that should continue. And early career researchers, there was another speaker as well that mentioned about early career researchers and how we have to foster these synergies. And when I spoke about diversity earlier, I didn't just mean diversity from the different regions and the voices coming representing different regions, but I also refer to diversity of the backgrounds and of the career level and stage that we're in. So it is not just that the early career academics will learn from synergies that they introduce and they launch with more senior, but I think that the most senior ones have a lot to learn from the early career academics, because they are more in touch with the new generation, and they can help us engage our students more into this multidisciplinary lens of teaching and researching sustainable development goals. So as soon as possible is the answer to that.
Thank you very much. Walters?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Professor Tenia has just said. And I think, yes, as soon as possible. Because I think naturally sustainability, like most environmental topics, lend themselves to that interdisciplinarity. So if we start early, then it's really, really important. We sort of, then it's important, because I think just as lawyers, I think we cannot really understand the sort of legal solutions that we are talking about and are being proposed without fully understanding the science behind it. Even in the most recent the advisory opinion that was published just 2 days ago, I mean, you could see the judges actively engaging with the science. So it's very, very important that if our students and if our students understand the science behind that drives the law, then that would make the laws that we're making a little bit more effective. And I think in terms of the training side of it, if I can just take on that question as well, I think there is a lot that we can do, even on a personal level. I think earlier on, I think one of the panelists gave the example of how they started integrating sustainability into their teaching. And I think we can do this across almost any subject that we teach. And I will give you an example of another area where I've integrated this. I mean, I had a course which I was teaching on international level standards, and initially the course wasn't designed with any sustainability or environmental issues at the heart of it. And even when I asked the students, can they see the connections between labor standards and the environment or even climate change? At the start of it, there is really no connection that they can see. But by the time we are halfway through it, they can begin to see the connections. So I think that there are lots of opportunities for us to integrate and bring these sustainability matters into almost anything that we teach. And that is how we begin to build capacity so that students can understand the connections between what they would naturally relate with more often with the sustainability questions that we are talking about.
Excellent.
Great. Thank you very much.
Dami, I'm going to ask if it's all right, because a few of the people in the final session actually have to leave earlier than the extended closing, which is 6:30. If maybe we could turn just for a brief word to Ayman and Douglas, and then we will come back in the report to Emily, Jennifer, and others who have given such excellent feedback.
Great. So let's do that. Thank you so much. All right. So over to you, Ayman.
Thank you very much. With pleasure. So I'll be very brief to 4 points, but each of them is very short. First, in terms of the importance of interdisciplinary approach, I wanted to highlight that it's important to clean in front of our own house. And by that, I mean our legal community that tends to sometimes not really look across silos that we have created in our own field. Second, that interdisciplinary approaches are needed because we need them when it comes to the scale of the challenge that we are required to solve. Third, not to be the one to let the fox in the proverbial henhouse, but I do know an entity that is quite good when it comes to interdisciplinary approaches, and that's ChatGPT and the like. So unless we want to be fully supplanted by these kind of entities, then we need to up our game. And lastly, to provide 2 quick examples of good examples in that sense. One is the Climate Law Day, Climate Law and Governance Day, Climate Law and Specialization course, and the equivalent in biodiversity, etc., where we are very keen every year when it comes to the Climate Law and Governance Day in particular to highlight this kind of interdisciplinary approaches, and likewise by highlighting our work at the Commission through different specialist groups and task forces, including in particular the Early Career Specialist Group by definition is interdisciplinary. Thank you.
Ayman is far too modest because he hosted the World Commission on Environmental Law of IUCN in his training center in Rabat, Morocco, which was an absolutely stunning conference and brought in so many of those interdisciplinary and early career scholars. It was truly remarkable, world class. So Douglas, the last word.
Yes, I'll be very brief here. I just want to highlight the merge interdisciplinary and training. It's very important because from my tenure as general counsel, when the technical staff presents projects to the board, etc., general counsel is like primus inter pares. The board listens to general counsel. So you have to have a direct knowledge of all the other, the environmental, the financial, all the other areas, so you can give a conscious and articulate the positions from the various stakeholders. So it's very important that we have, going back to the point Marcus made earlier, that sustainability on as wide a platform as possible. We need to be informed. We can't just keep our eyes or keep our information in silos as lawyers. We have to go beyond that now because we are actually in a new era. And the sooner we can realize that, the better it is for all of us as lawyers. Over.
Excellent. Thank you, Damilola. Thank you also in absentia to Professor Nandini. And without further ado, I will hand the chair to our final session and our keynote speaker who is online. In particular, of course, that is Dr. Ashfaq Khalfan, Chair of our Board of Governors, and our own Tejas Rao, Advocate and Research Coordinator and Senior Manager. Thank you again to everyone, and we look forward to the very last session, which features some of the most wonderful new initiatives in sustainable development law from different perspectives. I'm definitely handing the floor to poor Ashfaq. You are both muted. Oh, good. There you go.
Well, thank you very much. Colleagues, we only have, I think we'll be done in about 15 minutes, 13 minutes. So please do stay if you can. Just want to add one thing. I mean, I'm sure many of you are facing questions about the ICJ advisory opinion from people who maybe don't talk to you very much about the law. I'm certainly receiving, oh, sorry, I hadn't turned my video on.
It's on now.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I'm getting questions about the ICJ. How binding is it? And my answer is, well, it is actually the authoritative interpretation of the law. That's what lawyers refer to as the law. What difference will it make in practice? The answer is, ask me in 20 years. But a lot of this shows the need and really the opportunity for all of us to do our part to contribute to greater awareness and appreciation in the wider public about international law. We've talked about crossing silos, and unfortunately, we not only have to cross silos of discipline, and even in between areas of law and professionals, but even with the wider element of society. And because it's not just courts that implement the law, indeed, every person has a role in doing so. And Professor Megan Bowman made a similar point like that in the first roundtable in a more colorful way than I will. So there's a key point in expanding what we mean by legal leadership. So it's not just about the scholarship and training, even though that's hugely important, but we also then have to go beyond in terms of cultivating vibrant communities of practice that bridge sectors, geographies. So bringing in the activists, the policymakers, frontline communities, engaging in shaping the law together. And so what we need to do is to connect these legal principles to the lived realities of those most affected, be it indigenous peoples, municipal government officials, and on the one hand, leading all the way to decision makers on the global and local level. Some of whom are not lawyers. And so, you know, our role, engage, share, listen, consider working with people at the ground up, and so look at things from, you know, top down, bottom up as well. So yeah, many of the most promising legal innovations, I mean, we all know about legal pluralism, but also just in terms of influencing direct law, a lot has come from coalitions and youth movements. And you know, the ICJ advisor opinion actually came from law students in the Pacific, but they also had to work with a wide range of frontline people in their nations to bring that experience to the court, and some of it was actually directly presented to the court. So there's a need for us to think boldly about how we democratize access to legal tools, and in what follows, we'll hear about a few of those examples. And so now I'll pass to my co-chair, Tejas. Thank you.